92% of households that start the year with Peloton are still active a year later.
All because of a fancy bike?
It's not just a bike. Peloton makes treadmills too.
All treadmills are the same.
Our treadmills can adjust speed and incline automatically, so you never break your stride. Whether you're squeezing in a power walk or training for a marathon, Peloton can help you achieve your fitness goals. 92% stick with it. So can you. Try the Peloton Tread risk-free with the 30-day home trial. New members only. Not available in remote locations. See additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial.
Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's very special ADHD experts presentation. Today, we are joined by Dr. Temple Grandin, autism expert, author, scientist, and much more for an open conversation and a live Q&A. Dr. Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University and has been an outspoken advocate for autistic people and for the brilliance of neurodiversity. In 2010, she was named a hero in the Time 100 list of the most influential people in the world. She was also the subject of the 2010 Emmy and Golden Globe winning biographical film starring Claire Danes named Temple Grandin. You should watch it if you haven't. She became an expert in the field of livestock behavior and facilities design, where her innovations have transformed practices for the humane handling of livestock in slaughterhouses. Dr. Grandin has received honorary degrees from more universities than I can name. And I want to note that today's webinar is not actually a webinar. It's a conversation. As such, we will not have our standard slides, but we will provide access to supplemental resources under the event resources section of your screen. We encourage you to submit questions at any time. And we will try to reserve the last half of our conversation to ask your questions of Dr. Grandin. Before we begin, I would like to ask a poll question for our live audience. Which of the following best describes either your or your child's thinking style? We have object visualizers. Generally speaking, these are generally for all of them. These people excel with mechanical abilities, building things, artwork. They may hate algebra. Spatial visualizers excel at math, patterns, music, computer programming, may hate reading. Verbal factual excels at reading language, abstract thought, and history. Probably does not like drawing. And auditory thinkers excel at listening closely, mastering facts, also abstract thought, but visual perception may be fragmented. And then related to that question is whether you or your child were taught any skilled trades, such as woodworking, auto shop, welding in middle and high school. We're interested to see how much of that is happening or influenced our audience that's listening today. So while you do that, I will tackle a few housekeeping items. For answers to common webinar questions, please click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 465 to access the webinar resources. If you support the work that we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen a community of diverse thinkers, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for yourself or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from a deeper understanding of neurodiversity. Click the magazine tab on the screen to learn more. And finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Inflow. Inflow is the #1 app to help you manage ADHD. Developed by leading clinicians, Inflow is a science-based self-help program based on the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. Join Inflow today to better understand and manage your ADHD. You can click the link on the screen to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our free webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Okay, so without any further ado, let's dive in. Dr. Grandin, it is an honor and a privilege to welcome you into the Attitude community today.
Wonderful to be here.
We are so pleased. And, you dedicate your newest book, which is called Visual Thinking, to quote, all the people who think differently. And here at Attitude, we are so fortunate to count many different thinkers among our community members. So I really want to welcome our whole community here today for this really special conversation. And in terms of communication, you write in your book that language is the water we drink, the air we breathe. You revealed that you didn't have language until you were about 4. You didn't read until you were about 8. And then with considerable tutoring in phonics, you wrote, the world didn't come to me in syntax and grammar. It came to me in images, which was a beautiful line. Even today, you say that you think primarily in pictures because that's just quite simply how your brain works. And as a result, you notice details that everyone else misses. And those details have saved lives, dollars, stresses, waste. Your unique brain has made you the best in your field. But really, it's only recently that the world has began to acknowledge that there are different types of thinkers. As we said, object visualizers who think in pictures, visual spatial who think in patterns, and then, of course, language thinkers. And you argue that the education system is still catching up. It continues to pigeonhole students who perhaps don't test well in traditional terms and maybe pushes them out of higher education. You talk about this quite a bit in your book. I'm wondering if you can start off telling us how you first came to realize that your method of thinking was a little different. And was there a specific example or a memory that stands out where you realized everyone else was sort of thinking in linear, orderly terms, and your brain was doing something else?
Well, I went all through my 20s and had no idea that other people thought in words. But being a visual thinker helped me in my cattle work because I got down into the chutes to see what cattle were seeing, and they'd stop in a shadow or they'd stop on a coat on a fence. That was just obvious to me because my thoughts were in pictures. So in my late 30s, I finally figured out there was verbal thinking because I started asking people about how they accessed different kinds of information. And when I ask somebody to think about something they don't own, but they see them all the time, which is a church steeple, I say, think about a church steeple. How does it come into your mind? And I was shocked when a speech therapist just 2 lines like this, just 2 little lines where I see specific churches and I find the object visualizers start naming off where they're located. And that was a shock. That was my first inkling that different kinds of thinking exist. Now, in my visual thinking book, I describe some of the research that shows there's a difference between an object visualizer like me who thinks in pictures and a mathematician who thinks in patterns. And our educational system today is definitely giving priority to the mathematicians and to the verbal thinkers, because I couldn't do algebra. That's why I couldn't become a veterinarian. I couldn't do the math prerequisites. The vet school would have been no problem. It was the mathematics prerequisites. I worked with people who built complicated mechanical equipment and patented it that couldn't do algebra, but they had their own metalworking shops because they'd taken a welding class in high school.
Wow. And we asked people if they've had those opportunities to take those welding classes and things like that. In my experience, having 2 teenagers now myself, those opportunities are not common. In fact, 60% of our attendees here today said no, their child or they themselves didn't have that opportunity to learn any skilled trades while still in middle or high school. And
I think
what does that mean for us?
Well, I think kids need to be exposed to these things in middle school. We're seeing too many kids today growing up. They've never measured anything. I had a student in my class who had never used a ruler to measure anything and never have used a tool. We need to be exposing kids, early to these things. Another problem I've heard in the schools that do have skilled trades is that they keep special ed kids out because they're afraid of insurance and accidents. Well, I know individuals who are retiring now that owned metalworking shops that if they were a child today, they'd be special ed kids. See, this is the thing that's the problem. And we're really getting the problems with the object visualizer because the STEM programs now are putting priority on the math thinkers and the word thinkers. But we need our visual thinkers to work on all of the mechanical things. And also in science and engineering, there's the mathematical part, but there's also the visual part. I review a lot of journal articles and all this mathematics in these journal articles, but they leave out how they housed their animals. Or you have a journal article on artificial intelligence, all this math, all this computer programming, and they're going to train it to look at the behavior of cattle. But they didn't tell in the methods section how they videotaped the behavior to train the AI program. That was left out of the methods. And I'm going, well, what behavioral observation method did you use? Continuous observation, scan sampling? There's different methods. You got it. How did you observe the behavior and record it to train the AI program? You see, that's where you need my kind of mind.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about this in your book, just the value of neurodiversity. Very specifically, I'll use one of the examples you used, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak.
That's right. Yes. Different
thinkers who alone may not have achieved really the breakthroughs in technology that Apple Computers has achieved. How is that an example of neurodiversity in action, and what we can hope to achieve in a school system that welcomes and celebrates different thinkers?
It's very likely that both of those were either autistic or had autistic traits. Steve Jobs was the artist. This is the reason why computers have pretty fonts, because Steve Jobs took a calligraphy class. He wanted a computer to look nice. He wanted it to be simple and easy to use. But somebody had to make the inside of that computer work, also make the inside of the iPhone work. Steve Jobs did the interface. Now, on the Apple computer, Steve Wozniak did the tech part. Now, he wanted to add more features. Let's put 5 expansion slots on it. And Steve Jobs is going, no, I just want it where they can plug into the internet, plug into the printer, and it's just going to work. Make it simple so it becomes a household device. You see, one's a visual thinker looking at the user experience, and the other one is the techie, wants to put more and more features on it. But you need to have both to make either a computer or a phone that's going to work. Now, one of the reasons why Zoom took over video conferencing is you didn't have to learn how to use it. You see, that gets back to the user interface. That would be the visual thinking part of it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you suspect they had autistic traits. Do you feel that your object visualizer thinking is tied to your autism? Are they separate? Does it even matter?
What tends to happen with autism is you might get a more extreme object visualizer. You might get an extreme visual spatial mathematical mind. The autistic is liable to be more extreme. There's a lot of people that are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. But you get an autistic person, they tend to be the extreme visualizer or an extreme pattern mathematical. You're less likely to get the visual. And then you also get some verbal type. They often love history. They love facts. And they're very good at working at specialized retail, where they're appreciated for knowledge of a specialized product, selling cars, selling auto parts, selling office supplies, or sporting goods. Those have been successful careers for the verbal thinker, autistic person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had someone here asking, is it possible that someone with autism could fall into any of the thinking categories? And it sounds like the answer is yes.
Yes. And they tend to be the extremes. I mean, so-called other people tend to be mixtures. But I'm an extreme object visualizer. But there's people in physics that are on the autism spectrum. They're going to be an extreme mathematical mind. And then I know people that absolutely love history and facts. They'll know everything about certain types of movies. And they are definitely a word thinker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You talk about the education system and the fact that we are, as you said, really focusing on those who are more auditory thinkers, not the object visualizers, the visual thinkers. What can we do about this? Educators, we had one educator write in before the event to say she's recognizes the many different ways of thinking in her classroom, but the testing requirements are formidable.
Well, this is part of the problem. And when I was on the book tour for visual thinking, one of the bookstores had me do a talk at a local high school, and I spent an hour with the principal. He didn't know what visual thinking was. He only kind of understood mathematical thinking and word thinking. And I think one of the reasons why educators are pushing algebra so hard is they think you need to have algebra for logical thinking. Well, that's not how I think. Visual thinking is a different kind of problem solving skill. You just see maybe how a machine works, for example. And I know we need people in very high-end skilled trades. Just a few weeks ago, I visited a large beef plant, very, very big beef plant, and they can't find anybody to work on their hydraulic systems. And hydraulics powers a lot of the mechanical equipment. And he says, well, electricians are hard to get, but the hydraulic people who we really need. Well, I worked with brilliant hydraulic people that took one welding class in high school, started out the tiny steel shop, gradually grew their business, and then have a huge shop now that's building beef plants all around the U.S.
Mm-hmm. And I found it fascinating in your book when you talked about algebra. Algebra as a roadblock for some of these non-mathematical thinkers who may very well have in their brains solutions to very practical problems, as you said. Can you talk to us a little bit about algebra?
Well, you see, one of the problems I have is it's so abstract. I can relate mathematics like pi times the radius squared for sizing air cylinders because I see the air cylinder. Algebra, when they tell you, is totally abstract. So I don't have any way of storing that kind of memory. My memories are kind of like those pictures you take on your phone where it's a still picture and then it moves just a little bit. Those are how my memories are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so with the education system, making algebra a prerequisite for all higher math, even though algebra doesn't necessarily unlock greater understanding with geometry or trigonometry, are we losing some brilliant math minds who just don't think linearly or in abstract?
I'm really concerned that we're screening out, especially the object visualizers. And you need us. We've got infrastructure falling apart all around everywhere. And it's the object visualizers that are going to, keep water systems running, those kind of things running. And what people don't realize, it's a different type of problem solving. They just look at especially mechanical things, and they just see how to make it work.
Mm-hmm. So we have some great questions already streaming in. And one of the parents said, that they are homeschooling an object visualizer, and they would love some ideas for how they can provide some of these hands-on experiences to help them explore their mechanical side.
Well, this is why I did a little book right here for kids called Calling All Minds.
Perfect.
And when I was a young child, I spent hours building little parachutes, building little kites, experimenting with them to get them to fly better. And kids don't tinker anymore today. I mean, I've talked to parents where their child had never, ever made a paper snowflake. In my visual thinking book, I interviewed a doctor who was very frustrated teaching interns how to sew up cuts because they'd never used a needle and thread. They were totally removed from the world of practical things. And Now, I think in a lot of cases, kids need to be jumped to geometry, but also, how about just taking practical math? A lot of just very, very practical math on how to run your business, for example. That would be really good.
Right. And even, I think you mentioned this in your book, home economics. As far as I know, it's a dwindling number of high schools that are offering home economics, but really that was a very practical math, whether it was cooking or balancing a checkbook. Those kinds of skills are no longer emphasized.
Well, the problem is that kids aren't having life skills. I'm seeing too often where a kid gets an autism diagnosis or dyslexia or ADHD or some diagnosis, and they're not learning life skills. I'm talking about managing money, things like going shopping, ordering food themselves at the restaurant. They need to be learning these things. I mean, when I was shopping, I was doing that at 7 and 8 by myself. And I have some moms that are afraid to send their kid into the store to buy something when they're pumping gas at the gas station. And the kid has got to learn how to do things like that. I had a little allowance, 50 cents a week for allowance. I could buy 5 Superman comics, but if I wanted the 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And kids are not learning that very basic, very simple kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. We have someone wrote in to say here that she found algebra almost impossible, but then in college, taking courses in logics and sets, she was at the top of her class. So yeah, to your point,
I took a logic class, and I did well in that. You see, and how to get through the freshman math requirement, it was finite math, which was mainly statistics, probability, and matrices. And with some tutoring, I was able to do that. Thank goodness my introductory college class was not algebra. But I'm seeing students that want to be a veterinary technician or a veterinary nurse on their second and third algebra class. And so I've looked into the requirements, like for veterinary nurse, some states require algebra and others don't. Tiny bit of algebra maybe for drug dosing, but that can be memorized, and you have to be accurate in drug dosing. They better be able to do that when they're sleeping.
Right. Yes, you would hope. A couple of people here are wondering if you have advice for those parents who are trying to have conversations with school administration and teachers to better educate them about different thinking styles and encourage them to incorporate some of these hands-on learning experiences, including field trips, which are, again, not so common anymore. Help for them how to begin the conversation with like that administrator that you met who don't even know about different thinking styles.
This is the reason why I wrote my book, Visual Thinking, The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions, was to try to, get across some of these barriers. That's why I did the book. Now, I just want to talk about how I collaborated with my highly verbal co-author, Betsy. I write the rough drafts. They'd be kind of associational and maybe somewhat disorganized. And Betsy then, she smoothed it all out, rearranged it. I don't know how she does it, but we were using each other's complementary skills. This is something that's really important, but I'm just concerned that we're screening these thinkers out, and we're going to need them. Especially when you got infrastructure failing.
Right.
The first thing I tell, and I do a lot of talks to businesses, I said the first thing is you have to realize that different kinds of thinking exist. See, I didn't know that verbal thinking existed till I was in my late 30s. And learning that they exist has helped me to be a better communicator. But you have to know they exist, and they got different types of skills. And the kids that have labels tend to be more extreme, less likely to be a mixture. Again, you might get that extreme object visualizer or an extreme mathematical kid.
Yes. One of the things that I really appreciated about your new book, the Visual Thinking book, is how much research you cite, and all fairly recent, about different thinking styles. And so I'm wondering your perspective. Are we making progress here? Are we as a society coming to appreciate the value of different thinking styles? And part and parcel with that, are we making progress on autism and on understanding autism in really significant ways? What are your thoughts on the trajectory?
I think too many kids are sort of becoming the label. Let me give you an example. About 5 years ago, I had a young man come to me to interview me for a documentary about autism. And he seemed kind of depressed. And then I asked him what other photography he did. And he showed me gorgeous photography that he had done of different sports for major sports networks. Beautiful photography. And you know what I told him? I said, get back and get some more gigs from ESPN and go out and film skiing. Because he said when he was out filming skiing, that autism was kind of a non-issue. Well, one of his colleagues ran into me just about a week ago and said, you remember that guy you interviewed with? He's doing great. He's doing all kinds of sports photography everywhere. And because I suggested to him a lot less autism and a lot more photography. That's what I suggested to him 5 years ago. And then his colleague told me that that's really helped him to be successful. I just got a letter I got to answer about a guy that he's really into bicycles, and he's also into a lot of radical politics stuff. I'm going to write back to him, and I said, the bikes are a whole lot more important than the politics.
I think that's
one of the things that has given me a life that's been interesting and really worthwhile is having an interesting job. I'm a scientist, an animal behavior specialist. I design livestock equipment. It's kind of like that stuff comes first over the autism. Autism is an important part of who I am, but it's not my primary identity. Being a scientist or an inventor or just a problem solver would be my primary identity.
One of our listeners here today asked an interesting question. He said, Temple, you're obviously successful. Is that success in spite of your autism or because of it? Some people claim there's an autism light, but what's your view on that?
Well, extreme visual thinking has given me some advantages in animal behavior work and in designing equipment. And then high-end skilled tradespeople I worked with that were probably on the spectrum. There were, extreme visualizers. It probably helped them in their work. So it's both. I wasn't just sort of a middle of the road mixture. Having an extreme object visualization skill made me good at things that I did. Mm-hmm. And then you might have another kid who's an extreme mathematician. So he's doing a top programming job in artificial intelligence. But you know where they need my kind of mind? I'm working on the training data. Mm. Yeah, I just read a paper where this was for training an AI system for dairy cattle, and they did not explain how they collected their video data to train all the mathematics.
That detail there is missing.
And it matters a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. I can see that. And that's where you have really thrived.
This and for the object visualizers, let's just go over the careers again. Object visualizers, your top careers are going to be mechanics, probably big number one. There's been a whole bunch of, there's been 5 or 6 adults that I have talked to personally who have gotten off of video games and gone into car mechanics because they found out car mechanics was more interesting than video games. So mechanics, and the people I'm updating my PowerPoint right now. I'm putting a picture in of if you are a mechanic, this is a thing of beauty. It's a hydraulic power pack to run an entire beef plant. And if you're a mechanic, it's a thing of beauty. And I'm putting a picture of that in my next PowerPoint. Yes. And finally, 30 years later, the person who made that power pack has his own corporate jet and no algebra. Now I've kind of gotten off the subject, but you see, as I'm talking about this, I'm seeing it because I just looking at those pictures last night. You see, then I get off the track and I can't remember what we were originally supposed to be talking about.
No, you were talking about careers for object visualizers.
Well, person that started out single welding class, doing tiny little jobs in the beginning with a portable welder. And then the company gradually grew. Now, where a lot of these specialized minds need help is when they get big is running the business and finding the right person to do that that's not going to rip them off.
Pairing up with a different thinker, sure.
Well, the techies
got scruples.
The techies say you have to eventually hire a suit to run the business. And that really is true.
I don't know. We've gotten a number of people have complimented you on your suit today. So a lot of people appreciate your type of thinking. And I think we've got a good crew here. I did want to ask you about, we've talked about the careers for object visualizers and the hands-on.
Let's just go through the careers for the object visualizers. And I won't get off the subject now. The number one would be mechanical things, all kinds of mechanical stuff. And then working with animals is another big one. Training animals. Photography, another big area. And it has no barrier of entry. Photography and art. Now, I'm concerned about AI and art, but it's there's like, for example, this individual who's doing the sports photography. That's not going to get replaced with AI anytime soon. And then your pattern thinker or your mathematical thinker, obviously computer science, programming computers, the more mathematical parts of engineering, data analytics, music and math, they often go together. And then, of course, you have your word thinkers, teachers, lawyers, all kinds of word-based jobs, sales, marketing.
Right. It's interesting. We have a number of people here who are learning about their own minds as their children are getting maybe evaluated and diagnosed for both autism, and we have obviously a large ADHD audience here. And someone who asked very pointedly, what advice you have for learning about a person learning about their neurotype sort of late in life, and learning to embrace it rather than seeing it as a deficiency, especially after, for the adults, perhaps a childhood that was not embracing.
Good. This is my book, Different, Not Less. And it's 18 people diagnosed with autism later in life, describing their experiences in their own words. Now, where the diagnosis helped them the most was with relationships. For a lot of people, it was almost a relief to get the diagnosis. What I'm concerned about right now in younger people is a diagnosis holding them back on the career side of things and the job side of things. I see too many parents getting so overprotective, the kids aren't learning working skills. And that's something they need to work before they graduate from high school, starting out with chores, volunteer jobs, when they're maybe 11 years old, maybe at a church or nursing home or whatever. And as soon as the legal age, real jobs. Now, here's the little recommendations. Let's avoid the rapid multitasking, chaotic jobs, such as a takeout window at McDonald's. I want to avoid that. The other little accommodation that a lot of neurodiverse people need, and this will save a lot of jobs, is any task that involves a sequence. Give them a written checklist, like a pilot's checklist. If you just go yakety yak, 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 this is how you clean the ice cream machine, they're not going to be able to remember the sequence. But if you give them a pilot's checklist of the steps, that will save countless jobs, because employers get mad and say, well, I already showed them how to clean the ice cream machine 3 times. Is he stupid? Well, this is where they need like an external working memory.
Right. And that it's so interesting because somebody wrote in to say that was their challenge with woodshop in high school, is that the instructor only gave instructions verbally. And so they missed out on that opportunity to really explore woodshop because they just were constantly having trouble following all the instructions. So,
Well, the thing is, if the people don't want to do the accommodation, just remind them. Pilots need a checklist. I need one too. And the Federal Aviation Administration makes checklists mandatory on every single flight.
I love that. And it leads into another question I'm seeing here, which is parents who are in that place. They're perhaps teenagers, parents of teenagers or young adults, wondering what you attribute to your independence and your sort of mastery of executive function as you left home and went to college and then grad school. How did you build up those executive function skills to have, the confidence to pursue your passion?
Well, let's just start out with just really simple things with little kids. Learning life skills, bank account, shopping, getting up on time, being on time. That was drilled into me from a very young age. I never had a problem with getting to work on time. And then you do things like you set an alarm clock. You make a checklist. But I'm seeing so many kids today that have never gone shopping. I've run into them at the airport. I'll tell you right now, by the time they've left that airport, that kid's already shopped. I did it with a 13-year-old and I did it with a 12-year-old. And I just gave them money and sent them into the store across the hall. And I said, go buy something. Mm-hmm. It was their very, very, very first shopping.
Wow. Yeah. And, COVID has made life more complicated. As a parent, I can say our kids were, hidden away for a good year and a half to 2 years. And
it's caused a lot of problems, COVID.
Yeah.
And getting kids out. But we got to get kids out doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And because too many of these kids have too much done for them. Like often the parent will come up and the mom does all the talking. And I say, I want the child to come up and ask me to sign the book. I mean, things that simple. One of the things that helped me as a child is we'd sell candy for charity. Another thing that helped is in our neighborhood when kids were 7 or 8 years old, you put your best clothes on when the parents had a party and you had to greet the guests and shake hands with them. That teaches social skills. Mm-hmm. That's not a complicated thing to do.
Yeah, uncomfortable, definitely.
And then the other thing is teachable moments. Like, let's say I stuck my finger in my mashed potatoes and then licked it like that. Mother would say, use the fork. People think it's disgusting when you do that. Instead of screaming no, give the instruction and explain why for the rule. That's what you do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You touched on social skills and the importance of those. And, we hear so much from our audience that school is challenging, not only for the academics and the different thinkers, but socially. That some kids were actually relieved when COVID sent them home because they could learn without the sort of torture of the social realm. And I know that this is something you faced as an adolescent, and wondering if you have words of wisdom for the parents whose hearts are breaking, as their kids navigate middle school and high school social scenes.
I was bullied and teased in school, and I discussed that in my book, Thinking in Pictures, an earlier book. And one place I had friends through shared interests. This is a really important concept. This is where I got friends. Horseback riding for me in high school, model rocket club, electronics. For another kid, it might be band. It might be a school play. Friends through shared interests. One enterprising teacher started a Star Wars club for her autistic student, and then he got friends through that. But that's where a lot of these kids that are different get friends, when they can do a shared activity together.
Yeah. And did you feel that shared activity took away some of the overwhelm of social situations?
Well, it took away. I mean, it still hurt when I crossed the parking lot. They were bullying me. Well, now today I'd have to deal with being texted all kinds of terrible stuff. They call me Bones and Tape Recorder. And they called me Tape Recorder because I always used the same phrases. I didn't know why at the point, why they did that. But high school was the worst part of my life. I think this is another reason why we got to get these kids out working while they're still in high school. So we're having a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. I've seen kids that get through college just fine, and then they do a horrible time in the workplace because they've never had a job. And one of the big problems I'm seeing is just being late all the time. This is something I was taught at a really young age. You set the alarm clock. You got to be up in the morning. I was taught to lay my clothes out the night before. I actually still do that. So I don't have to look for the shirt. I put the shirt on that's on the back of the chair that I put there the night before. You see, now as I discuss that, I see it.
And that's an executive function strategy that you have employed successfully.
And set the alarm. Or if I'm in a hotel, make sure I have a wake-up call. But being on time was taught, because there's been a number of autistic kids that lost jobs because they simply were late all the time.
And we know
to allow extra time, like for me to drive over to school, normally it's 5 minutes. But if we have a train, you can wait 10 minutes at the crossing. So you have to wait. You have to allow enough time. So if we have a train, you won't be late.
And, we know that time blindness and time management in general are huge challenges for a lot of kids with ADHD.
One of the things that helped me, of course, we didn't have digital clocks, but helped me was a big old round school clock where you could see the second hand go round. And then every time the second hand went round, the minute hand moved one click. You could actually see it move. And that helped me understand the passage of time. And you can still get battery-operated versions of those big clocks. They're not very expensive. But I found that old-fashioned clock, I think, will be helpful to a lot of kids compared to a digital clock. Externalizing
time really helps. And as you said, checklists. A lot of parents we know have devised, for example, morning checklists of all the steps you take before.
Yeah, that's right.
We did have a mental health counselor write in who's listening, who said that a lot of the teens she works with who have autism and or ADHD are online because of bullying, very isolated. And many times they're not able to find work until they're 18. I know that you've done some work in like tour guides, right? I mean, sort of volunteer opportunities where you would perhaps be able to work on these things like time management, being on time.
Well, that's right. And I talked to a parent just the other day who's happened to be at an airport again. They run into me. And the mom said, well, the child is walking my dog, our dog. I said, he needs to walk the neighbor's dog because they've got to learn how to do a task on a schedule where somebody outside the family is the boss. It can be something as simple as walking Mr. Jones's dog. So every day at 7 o'clock in the morning, you got to be over at the Jones's house to get the dog and walk it and give it a full 15-minute walk or whatever and do the job. Church volunteer jobs. That's another place where you can have 11-year-olds passing out the programs, helping with the food. Those things can start really early, and they teach work skills.
And then if there are opportunities that are hands-on, that's sort of a win-win as well for those.
Well, you have to be 18 to do any of the skilled trade stuff. But
I was thinking like mowing lawns and. Yeah.
You can work in what they call safe retail at 14, which would be things like a movie theater, bagging groceries. Now, another problem I see with a lot of vocational counselors is they don't differentiate to where bagging groceries is a training job and where bagging groceries for certain clients would be a suitable career. But there's a lot of states where there's a lot of jobs you can do before 18.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Someone wrote in to ask, should educating our children on the different thinking styles and on neurodiversity, should that be required education in our school systems?
Well, I think teachers need to understand it, and that's why I wrote my book, Visual Thinking. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the stuff I aim at business leaders too, because business leaders, I think, are in a position where they work on changing the education system. I talked to one person who was a farmer, and he was so shocked that high school kids didn't, the cows gave milk, for example, things that basic, that he pushed to get more hands-on classes in the school. He was on the school board. See, I think that's where you're going to get some of the changes. Sometimes talking to administrators might be like talking to a brick wall. Mm-hmm. But I talk to business leaders all the time, and they ask me what's the most important thing they can learn. I said the most important thing to learn is different kinds of thinking exist, and they have different types of skills, and you need these different types of skills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that this person was suggesting that by educating the kids about different thinking styles may address some of these social stigmas, perhaps help other students recognize.
The way I sold jobs was to show off my work. I simply showed people what I could do. I showed people examples of my work. That's what I did. Here's a photograph and thinking in pictures of a bison facility I designed back in the 80s. They're still using it. And I would show people drawings and pictures of work. And I let the work sell itself. We need to be doing a lot more to make portfolios. I've got another one of my drawings in my autistic brain book. Now, here's a drawing. I hope I'm holding it in front of the camera right. Of a cattle loading ramp. I'm not getting the video right now, so you can see me, but I've got some problems with the computer screen blanking out, and which I'm going to have to get fixed.
We can see it, and I will.
Well, you can see it. Well, all that matters. I don't need to see you. You can see me, so I'm not going to mess with the computer. But what I learned a long time ago was to sell my work instead of myself. So let's say a person does beautiful artwork, you make a portfolio. In the example of the photographer, that's a field where you can have it on your phone, and you whip that phone out, maybe at the airport or maybe at line in the grocery store, and sell a job. This is the other thing. We got to find back doors into jobs. That's something I figured out very early on. And in the HBO movie Temple Grandin, there's a scene where I walk up to the Arizona Farmer Ranchman magazine editor, and I get his card because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, it would help my career. That's seeing a back door. And a lot of people don't see those back doors. And that's something I figured out really, really early on.
Mm-hmm. And it's, as you said, it's not easy. For anyone, but especially we know that, social anxiety can go part and parcel, understandably with autism and ADHD. So it's a matter of practicing those social interactions, I would imagine.
Let's go back to when I was 7 and 8 years old at my parents' parties, shaking hands with the guests, taking their coats, selling candy for charity. These are things that cost nothing to do. Mm-hmm. And those things helped me to go up to that editor and get the card.
Right.
And then I produced an article for it.
Right. Oh my goodness. We have so many, so many great questions here. One person wrote in to say, to ask if you have suggestions on how to kind of overcome a lot of the sensory sensitivities that go again with autism and ADHD. So I know that you, as a child, food textures were a big thing. Noises, light, a lot of those things are impediments that parents are helping their kids work through.
Let's just kind of go through these, and I've kind of got kind of some simple checklists. Okay, on the food pickiness, let's get the child involved in food preparation. So the foods you don't like, you can play in them in the kitchen. It's okay for a child to have a few things to hate. I can't stand slimy, like raw eggs. Got it. Puke just thinking about it. So the child can have a few things they hate, but you got to get a more varied diet. So get them involved with food prep. Now, I still have problems with certain fabrics being too scratchy. There are some fabrics I can learn to tolerate. There's others I cannot. Now, when it comes to noise sensitivity, one of the things that's been successful, let's take the child can't stand the vacuum cleaner or some other noisy thing, hair dryer. Let the child turn it on and off. Because when the child controls that vacuum cleaner, it may go from the most feared thing to their favorite toy. In other words, if the child initiates the dreadful noise, you can actually help desensitize it somewhat. You don't totally get rid of it, but you can desensitize it. Another mistake that's made is wearing headphones all the time. Because if you wear headphones all the time that block sound, you're going to make your brain more sensitive. So what you want to try to do is you can have them with you. Always have them with you. So if you go into one of those dreadful bathrooms with all those hand dryers and flushers, you can put the headphone on for that and then go out. But it is possible to somewhat desensitize it when the child controls the sound. Now some autistic individuals will need to take sensory breaks. And let's say the child would like to do stuff in shop and he can't stand the sound of the electric drill. Well, he needs to go down in the shop when it's not busy and just start drilling holes and stuff with the electric drill. Because when the kid turns it on and off, it often gets to be tolerated a whole lot better. Now, another issue is visual sensitivities. And this might be a top architectural thing. Flicker in LED lights. Some individuals with dyslexia, autism, or ADHD can see certain LED lights that flicker. And the way to detect the bad lights is to take out your phone right here and set it on slow motion video, just regular slow motion video, not ultra slow, and photograph the room. And you can find the LED lights that flicker. You can also find the computer screens that flicker. Usually laptops and phones do not flicker. But some computer monitors and flat screen TVs flicker, and you can find them. And then what you can do is you can go buy a lamp that has an LED light that does not flicker. I can't go into all the technical reasons why they flicker, and cost is not the factor usually. But find LED lights that do not flicker. Another little tip. You've got some dyslexic individuals where when they go to read, they see the print jiggle on the page. The print will jiggle on the page. Now, this might explain only 10 or 20% of dyslexias, but a really simple thing. See on the back of Calling All Minds, I've got a light blue color right there. Try printing the reading materials on different light papers, like light tan, light gray, light blue, light lavender. Let the child pick out the color. That can sometimes help a lot. It's just colored paper. Just try it. Experiment with fonts and different colored backgrounds on the computer and make sure that your monitor does not flicker. Or use an iPad or a laptop, because the tablets and the laptops do not flicker. But some of the other computer screens may flicker. You can test them with the slow motion video. So these are just some very simple things. Another accommodation is the pilot's checklist. I just cannot emphasize that enough. That would save a lot of jobs.
Along these lines, in terms of sensitivities, we're learning more and more about emotional sensitivities and emotional dysregulation as actually a fundamental symptom of ADHD. I know that, again, the movie, we learned all about your hug box. And a lot of parents here wondering about that emotional regulation part of the
deep pressure can be calming. It doesn't work for everybody, and there's other cheaper ways than hug box. You can or squeeze machine. Weighted vests, weighted blankets are often helpful. Now I got kicked out of high school for fighting. Again, that is described in detail in my earlier book, Thinking in Pictures. And I had to switch from anger to crying. I still was miserable, but I did not get in trouble for crying. I got in trouble for hitting with fists. Anger, and it's okay for boys to cry, because when the space shuttle was shut down, I watched the 60 Minutes show about that. It was the saddest thing. The scientists were crying and walking off camera. Well, because if you throw things at NASA, they fire you. NASA space scientists cried when their project was canceled.
Wow. I mean, that's, it's terrible in the first place that, our kids are facing, I think in your case, it was bullying, right? That
it is terrible. It is
that
terrible.
Triggered. Yeah.
And the other thing, and the job thing, because I've been doing this for a long time, that I see come up all the time, is you might have a person on autistic or dyslexic doing really well, and then they have a change of boss. That can be a very dangerous time for the minds that are different. Like the boss will just yak out the verbal instructions. Sometimes the person on the spectrum doesn't recognize the danger. At the Farmer Ranchman magazine, I almost lost my job when the magazine was sold and we got a new boss, and he thought I was really weird. And I didn't recognize the warning signs. But Susie, who did the ad layout, and I'm pretty sure she was autistic, said, we got to get a great big scrapbook together of all your articles to show Jim the new boss. And then he gave me a raise. But boss changes are dangerous times. And one job was lost because my mind thinks in specific examples. There was a fence building job. And this autistic man had worked for years building fences, got a new boss, yak, built the fence wrong. If he'd had a pilot's checklist of the things to build that day, it would have taken 2 minutes to make one at the beginning of the shift. He would not have lost the job.
Yeah. And would you say the same is true for, here we are at the beginning of a new school year for students with new teachers?
Yeah, new teachers. That's right. That's absolutely right. But I've seen really bad stuff happen where I know another guy I worked with probably was autistic. He was an electrical person, had a small shop inside this big old plant, and place was sold, and that went very badly for him. He'd been there for years, kind of the resident electrical genius who could fix anything. Change is hard. A change is incredibly hard. And boss, but there's one boss that knows how to work with them, and the way to work with this guy is give him projects to do. Challenges. Well, you got to fix this, and give him some time to do it.
And as we're getting toward the end of our hour, believe it or not, you started out before we went on camera. You said your main goal today was to help kids, neurodivergent kids, get out and be successful. And so here we are, standing on the precipice of a new school year. For those educators and parents listening today, what advice what can we do to start this school year out in a way that's going to do that?
One thing they need to realize is these kids have uneven skills. Good at one thing, terrible at something else. And there needs to be a lot more emphasis on building up the strength. My mother always built up my ability in art. And I was encouraged to not just do the same horse head over and over again, but to use different kinds of art and draw the entire horse. If a kid is good at math, he needs to be moved ahead in math and not doing baby math. We do too much on the deficits and not enough on building up the strength that could turn into a really good career.
Yeah. So look for those strengths, celebrate them, figure out.
In order to know you have a strength in something like building things, you got to be exposed to tools. Not exposed to it, how can you show the skill? Okay, let's say for me, an algebra book is a doorstop, but maybe for another fourth grader, an old algebra book out of the attic, that's the old-fashioned math, not all this verbal math, would be a door. For me, it's a doorstop, but for another kid, that same algebra book dug out of an attic could be a door.
I love that. Yeah. Finding ways to present information in ways that speaks to your child's individual brain and to your individual brain.
Expose kids to a whole lot of different stuff to find out what they would gravitate towards.
Exposure.
I mean, how can you get interested in something that you're never exposed to?
Exactly.
And I'm seeing too many kids, and then where to the parents, the kid just becomes the label. It's way too much medical model. The other problem we've got with autism is you're going from Einstein to somebody that has much more severe challenges, and it all has the same name. And so when people think verbally, they tend to just lump them all together.
Yeah, seeing the individual and seeing the individual brain. I'm sorry to say we are here at an hour and we are out of time, but Dr. Grandin, this was, we were talking about exposing our kids and ourselves to new things. You have exposed, I know me personally, and I hope our audience here, to a lot of new concepts and ideas and strategies and inspiration. So thank you so much for being a part of the ADHD Attitude community here today and for lending your voice and your expertise. We very much appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. I was really happy to be here. And thank you for having me on the program.
Of course. And for everyone listening, thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us for another Attitude webinar. You can learn all about those on attitudemag.com. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 465 to access the webinar resources. If you support the work that we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen a community of diverse thinkers, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for yourself or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from a deeper understanding of neurodiversity. Click the magazine tab on the screen to learn more. For now, have a great day, a great week, and we'll see you again soon.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
You've always had what it takes to make it happen, and we know the right tools can make it easier. At Strayer University, we're always thinking about new ways to set you up for success. That's why we give you a brand new laptop when you enroll in a bachelor's program, so you can start off on the right foot and keep striving. Visit strayer.edu to learn more. Eligibility rules, restrictions, and exclusions apply. Connect with us for details. Strayer University is certified to operate in Virginia by Chef.